Porter Cable 20-inch scroll saw. Not a bad unit. Retails about $200. There we go with the arms. This is the first scroll saw I've had in quite a few years. I used to use a 16-inch Delta 4560, I think it was. Variable speed, 16-inch cast iron table, up front, blade tension, and the top blade holder was toolless. The bottom one required an Allen wrench. This unit, up front blade tension, that's now loose. You have these thumb screws for your blade for your blade clamps. The way these work is the tip of this is just a chamfered screw that goes right onto the blade. Downside to this setup is when you twist this, it's actually putting that tension on the blade, and it wants to make the blade twist. So you can end up bending your blade while you're trying to install it. If you're doing any kind of interior cuts, you got to do this a lot. The DeWalt, to my knowledge, the Delta, both 20-inch saws, and the Excalibur scroll saws, this extra piece on the tip that it almost looks like a miniature puck, so that when that goes against the blade and you're twisting this screw, that doesn't turn. So it's just a lot of pressure to keep the blade in place. And when you have your blade tensioned, that's a little bit loose, but you want to be able to play a tune. So this setup is close to good, but it's not quite there. And I don't know if the threading is the same from this saw to those saws. If it were, that would be an upgrade I would do immediately. Compared to my old saw, it's probably less vibrations on this, although my saw I had a wooden stand that I had made. I did a lot of interior cutting, so having that quick release, at least up front, was beautiful. Undo the bottom, feed up from below your workpiece, and clamp it back in. You keep going. This has nice up front on-off switch, your variable speed, and this little light. For my old saw, your on-off and variable speed were under the table. When I was doing cutting, I really didn't play with the speed very often, so it was a matter of the on-off switch, and for that I just rigged up a foot switch. Makes life so much easier than reaching up, especially some work you don't want to take your hands off of it with the blade still moving. So a foot switch is a great investment for any scroll saw. With this light, I would prefer it if it were an inch longer, just because of the way it throws a shadow on your workpiece. It's more perpendicular. I like the shadow to make a point. It points right to the line you're trying to cut on. Workpiece clamp, blade guard, whatever you want to call this. I just put this back on for the video. I never use them. When you're doing a lot of fine cutting and a lot of turning, sometimes these will drop down into a piece that you've cut out. So now you have a hole in your workpiece, and this gets caught. You're trying to turn it, makes the whole workpiece shift over. Now you're putting side tension on the blade, which is not good, and you could be cutting into parts that you don't want to cut into. Also, putting the extra stress on the blade, you're gonna break your blade quicker. But the tilt on this is actually pretty nice. I ignore this gauge. What I do, obviously, when this is not here, you can get a right angle gauge right up to this, and you can see, make sure that the blade is perpendicular to the table. With this on there, it makes it a little difficult. Even if you try to come up all the way, you'd have to have something shorter, and then you're looking past all this stuff. You can do it, but however, so getting back to the adjustments on this, you loosen one knob, you twist another knob, the table moves. There is a positive stop that you can adjust under here. Highly recommend doing that. Even if you're not planning on tilting the table, just do that so you get everything nice and perpendicular. One thing I'm not sure about is there is a lot of play up here. So you have play here, you have play here, and then you have the blade clamp itself. This can actually slide side to side ever so slightly, and the bottom one does the same thing. So one thing that concerns me is that if this is all the way this way and the bottom is all the way in the opposite direction, your blade, now you're going to have little bends forming here, but also your blade is no longer going to be perpendicular to the table. If this whole setup had less slop, it would be much better. And I realize this is a $200 saw, but it's so close to being a killer value for the money that it's like, it bothers me. The air blower works fine. The faster the saw is running, the more air you're going to have coming out of this. That's just traditional for the bellows style blowers. I used to run an aquarium pump so that no matter what speed my saw was at, the air was always the same. Overall, it's not a bad saw. My criteria for a scroll saw is upfront, tension, and blade changing, at least the top. I don't worry so much about the bottom, at least the top, because I've always just fed up from below my workpiece. On-off switch and variable control, variable speed control. I use a foot switch. Anyway, I don't want to have to reach back here for my tension. Now, if it was get it close and fine tune, and the fine tuning was enough to let me change my blade, I'd be okay with that. But if you're doing a lot of work, it's all about efficiency. Downside to this is obviously you get a little more extra weight and more moving parts. So it's a trade-off. The throat plate is way too flimsy on this. Way too flimsy. And it's set below the table a little bit, so your finer workpieces, some of the stuff can get stuck as you're trying to cut. That's something that can throw you off. I 3D printed one that fits a lot better. It's still not quite perfect, but it fits a lot better and it's a lot more sturdy. The under table little blade storage drawer. It's just a good place to put things that are going to rattle. I get the concept. If you're not using the saw, you know, everything is together, but it's one of those things that I've never worried about. I always end up making a blade holder, and that's just how I went with it. Vibrations on this saw very low, depending on the speed. Every saw you're going to have certain speeds where the whole thing will go like crazy, vibrate like crazy, and other speeds where it's not so bad. Stand on this saw is pretty sturdy. I'm not used to using the scroll saw in a metal stand. The thing with scroll sawing is if you're going to be scroll sawing for hours on end, being comfortable is key. If you're standing and the saw is too low, you're going to be doing one of these, you're going to have problems. This stand is a little bit awkward. I'm sitting on a stool right now and I wouldn't be able to use a foot switch right now, so the way I used to do it, my stand was lower. I used to sit in a decent office chair and that would let me just go for hours on end. So if you're going to do this for a long time, think about the ergonomics of your setup. This does have a little dust collection port. It's like 1.25" vacuum attachment. I wouldn't want to run a vacuum for that long. If you have dust collection where you can run that kind of a hose, that would definitely be great because you do get a lot of fine dust coming off of these. The table itself is a bit on the rough side. I was reading somewhere where it was suggested to sand, it's aluminum, sand it down with like 400 grit wet sandpaper just to get rid of the roughness. That will help you with your workpiece sliding. I used to, on my cast iron table, I think I did give it a light sanding, but obviously it's cast iron, it's going to rust. I used to actually wipe baby powder on it. Just a thin bit of baby powder and my workpieces slid great. Another con that I can think of is motor. A couple of times I was cutting, and I'm not doing anything detailed, the motor would start surging. If you're not familiar with scroll saws, you generally are not going to be able to cut a straight line. Once you start cutting on your line, the blade tends to wander one way or the other. They used to say keep your waist to the right side of the line because that's the way it wanted to turn. When the motor speed fluctuates, that angle of deflection, I guess we can call it, changes. So you end up doing all of these little adjustments trying to get straight, and then the edge of your workpiece has all these little. So you want a saw that has a steady motor speed, and I have had a couple of issues with this where the speed was not steady. That's pretty much it with this saw. It's not bad for the money. It's so close to being really nice that I'm wondering if it's better off, if you have any used scroll saws in your area, if it wouldn't be better off buying like a Delta or DeWalt. New, they retail for $450, $500 in that ballpark. No, so sub $500 market, you jump from here up a couple $100 to get to your next level of saw as far as quality is concerned. Saw is less expensive than this that I looked at. Ryobi Wen, blade tension in the back. The 16-inch size, it didn't matter. I never did anything huge. Having the extra depth here, it's a luxury. Most of what I did would fit under 12 inches. So, and I mean 12 inches across the workpiece, most of the stuff. And the bigger pieces that I did do, I was using separate pieces of wood that you glue together for 3-dimension or whatever. So I never needed a saw bigger than 16 inches unless I was doing something goofy like pretending it was a miniature bandsaw and ripping a piece of pine or something like that. So yeah, it's not a bad saw. It will definitely get you going. Those are my thoughts on the Porter Cable scroll saw. Thanks for watching.